Anna, it's great to see you today.
Happy to be with you and your community, Jason.
So, Anna, the news that's come out of Ukraine and Russia the last couple of days has been pretty exciting. Russia just lost more than 40 strategic bombers to Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb. More than that, the Kerch Bridge got hit. But overall, it seems that Russia's being put more and more on its back foot. And what's very exciting, or what I think is very exciting, is the fact that within Russia, we see the situation's getting really bad due to its own internal factors, like the economy, which is doing worse and worse and worse, but also external factors like the new U.S. sanctions that might come, which would put a 500% tariff on the goods coming from any countries that buy Russian oil or gas. And that would destroy the Russian economy if countries like India and China stop buying Russian gas and oil. But overall, it seems that there's a fight now between the FSB as well as with the Russian military due to the attacks that Ukraine carried out. Both is accusing the other of major failures. It
Mhm.
seems to me that the situation is getting more and more unstable and worse for Vladimir Putin. What are you hearing?
Yeah, that's pretty obvious. And I wonder why some people and decision makers do not see that. Yesterday I watched a number of videos where people were super excited about Spiderweb operation. I don't know whether these are supporters of Ukraine or not because it's all over internet, it's global. And they were just describing this operation, saying, just imagine that someone comes up to you and says, let's develop this operation. First, we send lots of drones to Russia, then we buy trucks, then we put mobile houses on that trucks. And then at a certain moment of time, the roofs disappear and the drones start attacking Russian air bases, destroying their cruise missile carriers. Perhaps you would be taken to hospital and no one would believe it's possible. And just think about this fact. It happened. It was developed by a group of people in disguise deep inside of Russia. Russia that keeps frightening everyone inside Russia and outside Russia with the strength of their FSB. I think that perhaps if you think about Russia, one of these very first things is that like FSB, KGB, like police, Putin. That's the first associations that we have. And we believe, well, whatever is weak in Russia, but this FSB is strong. That's why all Russians do not protest against war and so on. No, they are just like paper tiger. Or my subscribers love saying toilet paper tiger. And it's a huge humiliation. Just imagine that moment when it starts happening. And there are lots of videos recorded by Russians when they do not understand what's happening. There's millions of memes, millions of videos. What do you do when you stop at a gas station and drones start flying out of your truck? And the reaction of Russian propagandists, they literally don't know how to comment because Ukraine is destroyed. It cannot perform operations like that. But they also want to blame Ukraine for the escalation, and they were frozen. And Solovyov came up with this idea to execute the Russian conscript who first filmed the explosions of this aircraft. That's a typical Russian reaction. They want to hide the truth, but not to find, the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is this collapsing Russian Frankenstein. So I hope one day Trump will impose tariffs not on friendly nations like Canada or the European Union, but it will finally reach Russia. And I guess a week or two of serious sanctions. And when they are abandoned by India and China, this will destroy them totally. And do you see that this attitude towards Russia is changing in the White House, in the United States? Do people see this weakness of Russia, that Russia is a classical bully, that it's not prepared to defend itself? There are so many failures. We can enumerate them later in the conversation. But do you see that people change their opinion?
Absolutely. I think that more and more people realize a couple of things. One, they recognize the fact that Russia's red lines mean absolutely nothing. Russia, again and again, has threatened World War III or nuclear weapons to be used, and none of that's happened. None of that has transpired. And there's a lot of reasons why I think that is. One is that Russia isn't even sure if their nuclear arsenal would work, so they can't really sort of take those risks. But second to that is the fact that within Russia as a whole, I think that more and more people are realizing that it is just a paper tiger. The fact is that Russia makes a lot of boisterous claims. But now, 3.5 years into the war, This
Mhm.
3 day operation is just not going away. And it's very clear that despite losing over 650,000 soldiers and about 50,000 deserters, Russia was not able to take a territory larger than Los Angeles County, California. Incredibly
Mhm.
enough, Russia has lost more main battle tanks than all of the European Union's main battle tanks combined. It's simply incredible. So overall, I think yes, there's more and more people who recognize the fact that Russia, though it talks strong, it says that it can do a lot. When it really comes down to it, it just does not have the capacity to do so. Russia is extremely limited. And so overall, those who think that Russia might offer the United States a greater future, that is business deals or contracts, it's also quite laughable. The fact
Yeah.
is, the Russian GDP, even before the war, was smaller than Italy's. It has nothing to offer anyone. It is a poor, impoverished country where out of 140 million people, 40 million of them do not even have indoor plumbing. So it is a totally backwards country. But that being said, overall, dude, what's your perception? Do you think that the Russians going ahead, if they were to lose the war, would reform? Or do you think that they'll just continue to be in a very aggressive state? Because Russia historically has been aggressive. Will it continue to be that way, or do you think it could change?
Well, both versions are possible if we are realistic, and much depends on how we act. And by we, I don't mean just Ukraine, I mean different neighbors of Russia, because all of us are neighbors on this planet, especially if we talk about big wars. But I think that for Russia to have a chance to become normal, it's super important for it to be defeated. And when we look back in the history, let's say the Second World War, before the collapse of the Nazi regime, there were lots of Nazis who were looking for the ways to cooperate with allies, who were prepared, I don't know, to destroy Hitler, to sign some agreements. But at a certain moment of time, after you witness all the crimes, after you see the aggression, after you see the plans, because Russia openly speaks about the desire to destroy the world order, the one that we want to protect. Once again, not Ukraine, but also the US, Europe, Australia, and all people who care for normal life. So, at a certain moment of time, even if they are looking for the way out, we cannot forgive them. We cannot accept that. We cannot sign any agreements. Ukraine knows that through the last 300 years of history. It's not the 20th century war. It persists, and our aim is to finish it and not to pass on it to the next generations. But I do believe that for Russian people to survive, to give them a chance to shape into something normal in 50 years or 100 years, they have to be defeated, just as Nazis. And now we have healthy, booming, dynamic Germany with its problems, but it's a very normal country that gives a lot of opportunities for its citizens from very different backgrounds. And in Russia, it's impossible. And no one is happy in Russia. Those great supporters on X or elsewhere, one of the comments that they cannot answer when they keep supporting Russia, Putin, I always tell them, go live in Russia, move to Russia. There are lots of people who dream of moving to the US, lots of people who dream of moving to some EU countries, right? Australia. I don't see millions of Americans moving to Russia, even those who speak that Russia is a beautiful traditional country. You've been there. You've tried what is life in Russia. So I think that is the best proof. Just finally see that, finally see the reality. And after Putin is defeated, we also have to understand that this war is not fought by him alone or by 100 people around him. That would be great, but it's not the reality. In every Russian tank, there is a crew. Every Russian soldier chooses to join the army. They sign contracts. That is their choice. They have a choice to stay at home. They have a choice to try and reform their village, their region, to try and influence, I don't know, to have finally elections in Russia, but they don't do that. They choose this bloody money and they join the army. So they are guilty. Those who allow this war to continue are also guilty. And after Nazi regime was defeated, a lot of Germans were taken to see what happened, what were their crimes, what the consequences, how they treated people. And the same must happen with Russians, because if we keep closing this door, if we keep pretending that let Russians do the Russian way, these problems, these dictators, they will keep emerging. And what are your thoughts?
It actually makes perfect sense. And I agree with you. And you're absolutely right. When you look at history, everybody likes to say that they didn't know about it, and hence the need to bring them to the camps so they saw what their state had done, what their fellow citizens had done. And in the case of this, it's very similar. When I was in Kursk, Russia, a few months ago, it was incredible that absolutely everybody I spoke to, all of the Russians, said that they did not support the Putin regime. Now, some of those people had their reasons that they hated Putin, which made a lot of sense, including the facts that their sons and daughters had to leave the area, not just due to Ukraine's occupation, but also due to the fact the economy had gotten worse and worse and Putin did nothing for them. But a lot of the people, I'm sure, did in fact support the war and did in fact support Putin, but they would never want to admit that. It was already not such a great idea while under Ukrainian occupation to state such ideas, perhaps. But overall, there's something fascinating with that you said that's also true, which is that very often we talk about how Joseph Stalin was a mass murderer, had killed millions of people. And this is true. But there's another part of that story that we usually don't talk about, which is that those millions of people that got killed, that means that there was millions of other people pulling triggers. Millions of triggers were
Yes.
pulled. So that means
Mhm.
that there was common Russians who were involved in these atrocities. This was not just Stalin far away who made them disappear. No, no, no. They were killed. They were shot in the back of the head. And that was done by someone. And those people, after the war, or I should say after Stalin's period, continued on in their lives. There was really never sort of a period where there was a debathification or a denazification where these people had to pay for their crimes. And incredibly enough, even in the West, look at the number of people who worked for the KGB or involved in human rights abuses during the period of the KGB who are able to emigrate without a problem. Fortunately, we were able to keep out, say, former Nazis, but we don't keep out people who are former KGB who engaged in human rights abuses. But overall, Russia does have a very bloody history. But what do you think the future is of Russia? Okay, it gets defeated, and many people say, but it's never had a democratic tradition, which I actually don't think is a problem. Japan did not have a very democratic tradition and was defeated in the Second World War. But today, it's a flourishing democracy. So there's obviously ways that countries could change. Now, what do you think will happen to Russia? Do you think that it'll stay the world's largest country, or do you think it's going to break up?
First of all, Russia is the largest country in the world, and obviously it does not need any new territories, especially if you have a look at the level of life on their vast territories. A lot of Russian territories are uninhabited. I don't want to make a mistake, but you can see that, I don't know, the population of Russia is equal to like the population of some way, way smaller countries. So not many people live there, even though in comparison to Ukraine, that's a lot, but in general. What many don't understand is that Russia consists of a lot of different nations, and these nations are very different, like they are not mingled harmoniously. We're not talking about this classical diversity that is present in our big cities, in our countries, but we're talking about very separated, peripheral, depressive regions. And they are depressive because the Kremlin, Moscow, sucks all the resources from them. And they are very different in the linguistic perspective, in the religious perspective. There are lots of Buddhists, lots of Muslims. Their languages come from very different groups. But what Russia does, it keeps Russifying them. It keeps banning their cultural practices. It wants to describe these national languages as something entertaining. You can have like an additional class once per week, but if you want a career, if you want something, you have to speak Russian, you have to travel to Moscow. That's where life is. And they do not invest, they do not give these regions, these republics to develop. And many of them had long histories before Russia occupied them. If we think about, let's say, Chechnya is a very vivid example because it's very different from Russia. It's a Muslim country with a different language located in the mountains. They have very different social life traditions, family traditions, neither worse or better, but very different. And they were occupied by Russia in the mid of the 19th century. That is not so long ago. So literally, they have like 200 years history with the Russian Empire. Russian poet Pushkin glorified bloodthirsty wars and genocide of these people in the Caucasus. And what Russia does, it describes Chechnya as a very natural part of Russia. No, it's not. It was occupied. It was very much Russified. Then in the 90s, they actually won the first Chechen war and they signed the agreement with Russia. But later, Putin decided, and pre-Putin, because it was not a democratic Russia in times of Yeltsin too. And what they did, they simply bombed these villages. They killed thousands of people. They did not have air defense there, and people could not protect themselves. And they reached that moment when, because of that constant terror, death, they were ready to accept anything. And that's how Kadyrov appeared in Chechnya, who is definitely not the representatives of Chechen people. He was like 18, and now he's 30 years on the throne. And by the way, what Putin does now to Ukraine is not the Georgian scenario, is not the, I don't know, Finland scenario or Korean scenario or Vietnam, as many discuss. It's a Chechen scenario when he keeps targeting at night residential areas. When I, for example, often stay in Kyiv, I have my Western Ukraine habit of sleeping at night, but lots of my friends go to the bomb shelters because they witness something on the next street to them and they know their life can end. And this is the tactic of terror. Even if air defense stops it, people did not sleep. People have problems, I don't know, blood pressure, stresses, different health issues. You're not happy because you don't sleep night after night after night. And if you're 70, it does not, it's not that easy. So that's terror, what he applies. And his dream is to break Ukrainian people so that, for example, we start pushing for let's surrender no matter what, but at least we will sleep at night. Luckily, Ukraine is also a strong and big country, and we have air defense, and it will not work out with us. But that's the plan, and we see that. So this collapse will be very natural, and it can give birth to some normal countries. And for us not to be afraid of that. We have to start looking at this potential of Russian decolonization. We have to build contacts with those people. We have to learn because there are a lot of national elites who protest in Bashkortostan, in Tatarstan. We often hear about that, but Russia hides it. And I'm sure that we don't know a lot of things. For example, I've discovered that recently, Siberia. Siberia is a very big region, and lots of people in Siberia identify as Siberians. They don't say they are Russians. By the way, an interesting fact, after Maidan Revolution in 2014, they had the movement for the liberation of Siberia, and they believe they have their own language. Russians claim that's a dialect. I'm not an expert here, but they made a Wikipedia page in Siberian, what they called. It disappeared the next night, and people were just like prosecuted for that very Wikipedia page. So Putin is very much afraid of that because he knows the reality that this is an artificial Frankenstein held by this poverty, by the absence of middle class that does not ask questions, that does not think, what's my heritage? Unfortunately, these decades of Soviet reign erased a lot. But there are national elites, there are interesting people, there are interesting projects. We just don't see them, partially because Russia hides them, the Kremlin hides them, and partially because we are lazy, weak, uninterested, and we have to do that, the job. If we want this decolonization, this dissolution natural that will happen to be safe and sound for our countries too.
Absolutely the case. And the fact is that Russia is a massive country, and despite what they try to project, they're
Mhm.
not very unified as a country, and they never have been historically. Russia didn't simply move from Moscovia to the Far East without enslaving people essentially along the way, as well as committing incredible crimes against the people that were located there. And today, those people are still part of a system, part of a federation that they don't necessarily want to be part of. But that is, of course, suppressed by the Russian authorities and something that we almost never hear of in the press. But the fact is, the situation inside of Russia is far, far more tense than a lot of people think it is. And it was great talking today.
Thank you. Thank you. Was happy to be on your channel.